Hello, I'm Alan Capper, South South News. Inward investment for developing nations is essential, and it is a very competitive area in terms of which banks are being courted, which institutions are interested in investing in which particular country. We're fortunate to have with us at South South News Herta von Stiegel, who is the founder and the Chief Executive Officer of Araya Capital. And welcome, Herta. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you very much, Alan.
Now, you particularly are involved in investment in Africa and leading and growing a major investment fund. Is that correct?
Yes, we are raising two funds with our strategic partners. One Sub-Saharan African fund to invest in financial institutions that are really focused on the SME space, because there is a lot of investment in microfinance that has been a success story in spite of the recent difficulties in the microfinance space. And at the upper end, people are well banked, but the entire SME space needs attention and needs finance. So to catalyze the space, we are with the Summit Development Group raising a fund to focus on financial institutions as well as FI enabling telecommunications, because we think those two sectors are key to poverty alleviation. In addition to that, we are raising a separate fund that is, again, a Sub-Saharan African fund with the view to investing in clean energy. The energy security issues in Africa are absolutely acute. They are also providing a significant investment opportunity. And if we are distilling it down to simply diesel substitution or kerosene replacement, it is absolutely key to stimulating the economies in the various African countries.
Right. Well, energy, telecommunications, climate change, very much linked with where you would put investment, I imagine. You're not going to be investing in industries that have those kind of primitive power demands. But how selective can you be if you take a country that is really extremely impoverished and needs finance at every level?
It's very difficult with very, very poor countries, the low-income countries, because if we look at statistics, for instance, our focus on Africa is for several reasons. One, demographics. By 2050, Africa as a continent is going to have 2 billion people. That is greater than China, greater than India. It's actually the only continent on Earth where the population is going to double. In the States, we are barely growing. In Europe, the population is shrinking. Right. So you have a very growing, very young population. So demographics militate in favor of investment. Secondly, issues with respect to climate change. Ironically, Africa has contributed so little to the climate change issues that we are experiencing right now, yet it's going to be the most affected, negatively affected by climate change. And that is largely because of what you alluded to, the low-income countries, where you don't have the same ability with respect to medicine and so forth to really address some, like malaria, diarrhea, and so forth, a lot of the issues that result from pollution and from adverse climate. So investment in low-income countries is not easy. However, there are a number of institutions like the development banks that are specifically focused on inward investment in low-income countries. And the private sector needs to come alongside the development banks to ensure that the inward investments in these countries increase rather than just having reliance on aid.
Well, this is right in line with the UN Development Goals, the development of sustainable investment. And that is particularly important in infrastructure in the developing countries, because infrastructure covers everything from rail to information technology. If you look at the penetration of cell phones in some of the developing nations, what's happened in the last 5 years has been astonishing, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The penetration of telephony has taken everybody by surprise. It is an industry where even the large players, like Vodafone, etc., completely underestimated the potential in the African context. And Dr. Mo Ibrahim was one of the few with Celtel who really was pioneering in this space. And that industry is taking off. It really has leapfrogged some of the other parts of the world. And I think what we are seeing with telephony in the African context, I believe we can also experience in the energy space.
Right.
We see a real parallel between the success in telephony and what is achievable with particularly clean energy, because a lot of the solutions that are needed for the African context are actually off-grid solutions, because they are kerosene replacement, they are diesel substitution, and the necessity for a grid is no longer paramount.
Right.
If we can bring renewables into the equation. So addressing the broader infrastructure needs is absolutely key, and not just with respect to the huge projects. I think normally when we're looking at institutions like the World Bank and the UN and so forth, a lot of the emphasis is on the larger solutions, the larger infrastructure plays, and those are important. But we need to be able to invest in the smaller businesses as well, to recognize where the industry is. For example, the clean energy space, this is an early stage sector, an early stage industry, and we need to be able to invest in independent power producers at an early stage to catalyze that particular industry.
And is it difficult putting a major fund together? You're putting two funds together. They exist now, but are people really interested in investment in Africa? Because I know China is very much involved. You've told me on a previous occasion that the United States and Europe have rather hung behind in all of this. So is that changing?
It's changing, but it's changing slowly, because we are in a fundraising environment where while we have certain commitments to the funds, we are still fundraising, and it takes a lot of education, because for particularly Western investors, Africa has been more a case of philanthropy rather than real solid investment. Right. And as long as we think of Africa as a place for aid, a place for philanthropy, the investment opportunities that the continent really represents are not necessarily appreciated and noticed.
No.
In spite of the fact that, particularly in the private equity space, the returns in Africa historically have actually been very high.
Yes.
They have been 35 to 45%.
Well, that's a premium return.
Absolutely, and taking into account even the risk premium for the continent and so forth. So the returns are there and the investment opportunities are there. And right now, certainly China is making tremendous contributions in investing, but particularly in commodities, very strategic commodities. But slowly but surely, we are seeing the work of the development banks complemented by private sector investors as well. It's still trailblazing, and it's still a frontier market. Although I think it is important to stress that Africa is not a country.
No, no.
It is 54 countries with very different demographics, different infrastructure, different rule of law, different political stability. But if we look at sub-Saharan Africa right now, most of those countries have made tremendous progress. Smaller countries like Botswana, like Zambia, Namibia, larger ones like South Africa, have really moved up the pecking order, if you will, have increased their standard of living to become middle-income countries, but still with incredible energy security issues and real needs that need to be addressed even for middle-income countries.
Right. When I talk to you, I get the distinct feeling that you have something of a love affair with Africa. Is that true?
Well, in my investment banking days, Africa for me was a place where you went on safari and relaxed, because quite frankly the wildebeest couldn't care less what's on your business card. It was a great equalizer. And then I became interested in Africa from a philanthropic point of view, and looked very closely at microfinance, looked very closely at the economic empowerment of people in general and women in particular,
right,
and the importance of education. And then recognizing that really what Africa needs more than anything else is really meaningful inward investment, and really coming alongside Africans, because I'm so encouraged by the growing population in Africa and Africans who really want to help themselves. Right. They don't want aid from us. They want to help themselves, and they want people who come alongside them to really make a difference for their country and their continent. Right. So yeah, Africa has a very special place in my heart.
Well, the love affair of Africa extended to you climbing Africa's highest mountain, Mount Kilimanjaro, and in very special circumstances, which actually has resonated into a forthcoming book, which is going to be full of invaluable business lessons as a result. But how did that come about? Because this was not just an ordinary group of people, was it? It was a group of physically and mentally challenged young people that you took to the summit.
Yes, I was privileged to lead an expedition of climbers up Mount Kilimanjaro. It was born out of a desire to really conquer this mountain. I failed when I wanted to summit Kilimanjaro for my 40th birthday, so it was unfinished business. I wanted to go back, but I didn't want to go alone. And when I had the privilege to lead this expedition, it was really with, as you said, a group of mentally and physically disabled climbers who were all teamed up with their non-disabled buddies. The idea behind the climb and this expedition was really to demonstrate that each one of us, regardless of our background, ability, race, gender, has the right to dream and is entitled to dream. And secondly, that we can achieve a lot more together than any one of us separately. So we had 7 climbers, 6 from the UK and 1 from Saudi Arabia, and their non-disabled buddies. So to my knowledge, this was the first multi-ability, multinational team to attempt to summit Mount Kilimanjaro.
That's an extraordinary achievement. And the book that has come out from this is going to be published all around the world fairly soon, I believe, and it's called The Mountain Within.
That's correct. We produced initially a film, a documentary entitled The Mountain Within, and the title was very carefully chosen because most of us tend to focus on the external obstacles, the mountains that are outside us. So whether it's a Mount Kilimanjaro or whether they're metaphorical mountains, our focus tends to be on the externals. The title, The Mountain Within, really connotes the internal struggles that each one of us has. Each one of us has a mountain within or mountains within to conquer. And the lessons in the book are business lessons, are leadership lessons.
Well, could you give me a couple of examples of, you don't want to give the whole book away, but a couple of lessons which I'm sure would apply to business, whether it's in Botswana, where one of your offices is, or in London or in New York?
Absolutely. The business lessons range from things that we know but are difficult to practice sometimes, such as choose to persevere, deal wisely with criticism, fail fast and fail forward. In other words, how do you use failure not as a setback but as a stepping stone? And how do we deal with failure? Keep your winning team strong. And then last but not least, there are 16 business lessons in the book, or leadership lessons in the book. And then the last one is don't stay too long at the top.
That's an intriguing one, and we probably could build an entire interview around that one. But I do want to wish you lots of success with the book and continued success with the investment funds for Africa. Herta von Stiegel, the founder and CEO of Araya Capital in London and Botswana, thank you very much for being with us at South South News.
Thank you very much for having me.
Alan Capper, South South News.